Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Geeks of the Round Hangout for House of Cards, Chapter 3, the Peachoid episode. We've got a small hangout because people have other obligations. Allison is working tonight, and Matt Crane sends his regrets that he's sick. Who we do have is Emily Lynn on my left and Lynn on my right. We've all watched the episode and are ready to chat about it. So, how you guys doing tonight?
Good, good.
Awesome.
It's kind of frustrating naming these hangouts because the titles are just chapter number. And I'm amusing myself by thinking about what it would have been like if they had given them a title scheme like some certain sitcoms, like The One with the Peachoid.
Or something pithy, you know.
Yes. But that's the one. That's what this is always going to be remembered as, the Peachoid episode. I've watched ahead. I think we all have, and this is what I felt was the most easily digestible, the most accessible episode of the whole run, actually. And it made me think about sort of traditional television structure. If House of Cards had to go through the normal network TV airing process, they would have had a pilot episode, which probably would have been a 2-hour pilot, the first 2 that David Fincher did, and then several months later they would have shot everything else. And that, in a normal TV structure, the second episode winds up functioning as sort of a second pilot because they have to reintroduce the rhythms of the show. And I felt like some of that was going on here. Was I the only one who felt that?
I wouldn't call it a rhythm. I prefer to say that it was, I guess it added more depth.
Okay.
As opposed to rhythm. I think the rhythm seemed to be, it slowed down. It slowed it down is what it did. Maybe is that the rhythm that you're talking about? That it went away from being the fast-paced, we lost Emily.
Yeah, I'm reinviting her.
Okay. It lost that fast-paced kind of thing, and then it slowed down when he had to go home, when he was forced to go back home. And I like that. So,
yeah, I agree with that. And one of the things that made me think of that, the one that made me think down the line of reasoning that I was that it's an incident-based episode. It's what's going on in Washington. His education bill is all still happening. But it's in the background, and meanwhile he's got this one crisis of his own to deal with. He puts out that fire, and it's really it's cut and dry. He starts the episode with a crisis, resolves it by the end of that episode, and it really hints at more of an episodic structure for everything else that's going to come. Welcome back, Emily.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I was just talking about how this episode represents or hints at a more episodic structure, because what we have is the main plot still going on in the background in Washington, but we follow Underwood to his home district where he's got this little crisis to put out, and he does. And that's the whole episode, is that this one crisis is brought up and resolved. Which, when I was watching through, before we agreed to do these hangouts, Allison and I watched the first 3 episodes, and I was like, oh, okay. Obviously, the first 2 are a unit, and then this is the first, episode, right? Did you have any input on that, Emily? Not getting any audio from you now. Oh, no. You're not muted.
Ah, okay. There we go. Sorry. No, I think to a certain extent, this episode, I mean, it's not a standalone, but it's not as connected as those first 2 were, definitely.
Yeah, there's going to be another one later on that really is. It's almost a bottle episode. that really could have just been removed completely from the lineup and nobody would have been the wiser. And this isn't that isolated, but I did feel like it was pretty strongly. I feel like it was almost intentionally easy to digest in that we got an A plot that was fully resolved by the end of the episode, which I felt was sort of. It almost felt anachronistic because we're not watching this week by week on a network. And I also thought that was worth mentioning because we didn't talk at all last week about how this is being released. It's kind of an elephant in the room.
I don't know quite how to think about how this is being released because it's just it's such a strange way to do a show.
Yep, true. And that's...
It is. I mean, I'm waiting to see all 12 to see if this is one of these shows where somebody's going to come back and write a wiki article about how the episodes were out of order and what needed to go and something like that. I don't know.
If they put anything out of order, then they were really, really clever about covering it up. But I don't see why they would do that.
This really slowed it down.
Yeah.
But in a good way. Like I said, there was the part where you were gone for a few minutes, Emily.
Mm-hmm.
I was saying that this episode kind of forced Frank. Frank was forced to go back to his roots, and it kind of slowed it down from that ruthless. I'm here. I am, and I'm going to use Zoe Barnes to further myself and herself, and this, that, and the other. And it forced him to just go back, and it humanized him a bit more. I mean, there is a person there. He's not just a robot. He's just not a ruthless whatever.
I don't know. I think it's almost the most ruthless he's been. I mean, in terms of what he's using there.
Right. Well, yeah.
I mean, that scene in the church is pretty dark.
Yes. Agreed. Okay. Everything aside, that was bad.
In terms of slowing down the story, though, I see what you're saying, that it really... Those first two episodes are so intense in terms of his scheming that this really draws that back.
Yep. Yeah. And it did reveal a lot about his character. It revealed a pretty complex attitude towards his old hometown. How he kind of hates where he came from, but he also likes going back because it humbles him, which I thought was a delightfully nuanced take on it. He could have just as easily sneered at everything he saw and just been like, I hate this stuff. I hate my constituents. And that he didn't play it They didn't play it like that, and I appreciate it. That sermon I did want to bring up because that's a whole bullet point on my screen here. Such an excellent piece of oratory, but it's also this amazingly insincere moment.
Yeah.
Just ridiculously manipulative and he does that thing which is the signature of the series where he suddenly looks at the camera and starts talking directly to you.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
And nowhere do I love it more than in that scene.
Oh God! It was a really great estrangement effect because it really is an excellent piece of oratory that he delivers there.
Yeah.
Even as you realize it's kind of fake, and the minute you might be getting drawn into it is when he levels with you. I never knew my dad. I never thought much of anything of it, and just reminding you, hey, don't you get suckered in too. We're doing something else here.
Right. And that slack jaw dry delivery.
Oh man,
is so perfect.
And what really amazed me was that in this episode we get to see him go back to his hometown, and we get to see him use basically every tool on his belt here. He uses his accent. He uses his underprivileged upbringing. He uses his religion. There's nothing that is too sacred for him to wield.
No, absolutely not. Like everything he can do to get what he needs, like he's willing to use. None of it matters to him. There is no sacred cow.
Yeah. Which brings us to speaking of things that are too sacred to touch. What was your read on the scene where the crazy lady assaults Claire in the graveyard? Where this is disrespectful. You shouldn't be running here. What do we make of that?
The second time around, it almost struck me as even weirder than the first time I watched it, which is I still don't quite know what that scene is.
It does seem like there's an intentional effort, and I think it's every episode that I've seen so far. Definitely every episode we've had so far, in which there's at least one just kind of self-consciously artistic image, and I feel like that was it, the crazy lady in the cemetery.
Yeah.
For this episode, does it reflect the motif that we've seen so far, and that I spoiler alert, will continue, the motif of physical fitness?
That's what I was thinking, and Emily might relate to this more than me. Have you gotten the impression that she's going through? They keep bringing up the child thing every now and then, and I figured that they were just a couple that had decided that their heart was going to be in their careers, and they weren't going to have children. But I'm trying to figure out whether she's going through early menopause or the after effects of chemo or radiation or something like that, and they're running over and touching the fact that she got, she came somewhere closer to dying, which, a year after a friend died, I'm just kind of like, let's go away from that, please. I don't know. It's somehow, but maybe I'm reading way too much into this.
That is not an interpretation that even crossed my mind, but could be.
No, I haven't seen that, but there is something to that.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the kids, and sort of like when she's watching the young couple there at the end.
Right.
And I'm not quite sure what to make of it, in terms of, like, because she has this little bit of a smile on her face there, and she's such a hard character to really get into.
Right.
They
reveal nothing.
Yeah, and we're not going to get into her head for real for like another half season yet.
Okay.
So, having watched ahead, I don't want to spoil anything, but I will say the issue of their childlessness is touched upon.
Okay.
In a direct manner at a later point, and that we will have a lot to discuss about that when it does come up.
Awesome.
But yeah, so I'm glad to see that the lady in the graveyard was as puzzling to everybody else as it was to me. Oh, the other thing I wanted to bring up, going back to the A plot, was Lynn, you brought this up via chat in last week's hangout, and I was like, oh wait, we're not there yet. Let's talk about that opening scene where Stamper stands up to Underwood.
Loved it. Like, I think you need him to not just be a minion.
Yeah.
Like,
agreed.
To have something there, because
right.
What use would he be to Frank if he was just a yes man? He wouldn't be that important to him if he was just like, okay, whatever you need, boss. This is like, well, I'll do whatever you say.
Another Frank, yeah.
Right. We need to have somebody that's more than a sycophant, but he's got something. I don't exactly know what he has invested. I mean, as of episode 3, what his own personal agenda is, except that he might be thinking about being, if for some reason Frank gets even farther, because I don't think he wants to be president, but he definitely wanted that seat that he did not get, and Stamper wanted to be his right-hand man, and the stuff we find out about him later is, he's made a sacrifice, and he's ruthless enough to do some of the dirty work for Frank, and he's not going to let that go to waste by just saying yes to Frank all the time, and he's going to keep. Because that was kind of rare. I was like, well, wait a second here, who's?
Yeah, it definitely
Yeah.
it changed my read on the character, which was still which is still developing anyway, just because the series is still new. But it also made me wonder: does Stamper himself, does he have an ulterior motive here, or is he just arguing forcefully because he's on the right side of this argument?
I think he's on the right side of the argument. I think it's good for his character in order to see that he's that smart and that on it quickly. I also think it adds another layer to Frank's character that Frank didn't see it.
That's true.
Frank, or at least is so distracted by the teachers union thing that it doesn't register him. Maybe under other circumstances it would, but that Frank doesn't see that is a little bit of vulnerability that I think we need.
That's a good point, because that was one of the things I brought up last week. Was that up to the end of the second episode, Underwood is pretty much flawless. I mean, everything he attempts, he does it like slam dunk, home run, that and other such mixed metaphors. So it's good to see him make a potential error, even though his right hand man keeps it from being a real mistake.
Right, and it wasn't. I mean, oh God, what am I trying to get at? It was a potential political error. Is what I'm. It's. Yeah. I mean, if Frank were president, Stamper would be the. Sorry, is it Stamper or Stamper? I'm sorry.
I thought it was Stamper.
I think it's Stamper.
Okay, and he's chief of staff. I mean, he's like. Yeah, that is the perfect name. He's, and he got to a moment when Frank was just kind of waffling like a kid that didn't want to do his chores. It's like, come on, man. You must go home. So it was kind of I don't know. Anyway, I'll have to watch it again and again probably.
It is Stamper with an A.
Okay.
Talking about other characters that we haven't gotten to know quite that much yet. We get the introduction of Underwood's security detail, Ed Meacham.
Yes. Oh, poor Ed.
I know where this is going.
Yeah, and so I don't want to touch on that too much. One thing I do want to bring up is the scene with him at the end with the flowers in the vase.
Yeah, it was kind of weird. It was kind of elegiac and also a little eerie with him being in the house alone.
Yeah, I felt the first time I watched it, I thought maybe that was going somewhere where it didn't end up going, and so I was wondering this time whether it was just like you see him adjust that vase a couple of times, and whether it was just showing the sort of like dedication he's suddenly having to this, that to show how much he wants it because of the stuff that happens to him later, or what. But it's a little bit creepy.
Yes,
it's a little bit weird, and it's so emphasized.
It was like I thought I'd missed something. I was kind of like, why is he being so personal with a bunch of flowers? And he just got too personal too fast or something, and it was just odd. I still haven't gotten that whole read on that. His character was just, like bam. So
yeah, we're gonna find out more, and this is one thing we can put a pin in, and I can say, hey, remember in episode 3 when we talked about that scene? We'll come back to this. So. Which brings us to what I guess is the, if I'm thinking structurally, it's the B plot, which would be Russo and Christine doing continuing their courtship and her considering a job offer. I have to say, the scene in which Russo had the little bag, was sitting at the sink, and we weren't sure what he was going to do with it until he did it, was the most suspenseful second of this entire hour of television.
It's really well played.
Yeah, for me, it made me realize how much I'd come to care about this character in a really short amount of time.
Yeah.
And it also drove home for me, it made me realize that this is the only guy on the screen who I'm not sure what he's going to do next.
No, that actor is good at that. So a couple of years ago, I guess it was 2 years ago, Law and Order tried out Law and Order LA.
Right.
And he was one of the two cops. He was one of the cops.
Oh.
And he was really good at that. But he played the same type of not 100% predictable character, kind of like this. It's like you're not exactly sure if he's going to push a little bit outside the box or stay in, and that was really good. I mean, he was the most interesting of the characters on that show as the two seasons it was on. It wasn't that great, but
looking down his IMDb resume, he's been in a lot of procedurals.
He has, and he plays a cop the best. I mean, he comes off as, this cop could go dirty at any moment if he needs to, and that's just the way he is, and it's ingrained in his personality. And so, yeah, as we progress with with Peter, it'll come out more.
One thing that I realized is I really do care about this character, which, I mean, surprises me for a couple of reasons. One is, when I first watched it, I cared about it too, and it's only 3 episodes in. Also, his equivalent character in the original, I hated him. Like, I did not care about him at all. I just, I wanted to punch him in the face. But
you think that's canny writing, or is it all in?
Well, they've made him a deeper character already.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already seen these human parts of him where I believe that he loves this woman. I believe that he actually is struggling with the substance abuse and with wanting to be a good guy.
Yeah.
And what that means when you come into contact with somebody like Frank.
Yeah, the characteristic of him that has struck out at me the most, and I'm sort of acting on information I get later on too, but it's his sincerity. He is just this passionate, bracingly sincere guy. And what's interesting to me, it works to his advantage. He's popular with his electorate. It works to his disadvantage because he's susceptible to vices, and he uses coarse language that somehow comes off charming anyway. But like my boss. And it's well, the question I wanted to pose to you guys is, does this make him come off to us, to the viewers, as better than the rest of the characters we've seen in the show, or worse, or about the same?
Well, I can't. I feel bad about answering without moving into further episodes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I can say that. Do we want to do that since it's only the 3 of us and we've seen at least through?
We're actually broadcasting to YouTube, and other people are going to be able to see this. So.
Alrighty. So no.
We'll keep it. Keep it on the chest right now.
That's right. I keep forgetting that. So I mean, the fact that he is passionate, I'm glad you brought that up, because Frank sees that and he uses that passion, to get this guy to maneuver him where he wants, and that was so skillful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In some ways, because he's the sincere guy, and I think one of the better people on the show, I get more frustrated with him when he screws up.
Yeah.
Because when Frank's being Frank, that's just the character, and it's fun to watch and it's enjoyable, and I don't really judge him for it in a weird sort of way, because it's just that's who he is, and it's so bombastic. But when you see Russo screw up, it hurts more, because you know that he doesn't want to be screwing up.
That's a good point. I was talking with somebody on a thread. I think it was you, Emily, or maybe it was my other friend Amy. I'm not sure. But we were talking about likable characters and uh, about how likability is kind of a mutable characteristic when you're dealing with
Oh, but
anti-heroes.
this was when we were talking about like Mad Men, wasn't it?
Yes, it was
And Breaking Bad. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the one that really came to mind was Walter White versus Mike, where Walter is a character who you kind of alternately love and hate, like you're supposed to relate to him, but he also is on this downward spiral.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, from the minute he's... One second. Mike, from the minute he's introduced, is just unapologetically evil.
He's a cold-blooded killer, yeah.
Yeah, he's introduced as this unapologetically cold-blooded killer, and fans loved him.
Yeah, he was my favorite character on the show.
And the whole point of it was that he's a guy who knows who he is, and he knows his place in the world. And I think we're seeing that same dynamic with Underwood and Russo right now, because Underwood is this unabashedly awful, evil guy who's completely unapologetic about being in it for himself. And Russo is this guy who still kind of cares about what happens about being a good person. Which is why I think it's a legitimate question. Does he come across as better? And I kind of think he does, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But on balance, it's not as stark a difference as you might think. Because his fallibility makes his failures harder to watch.
Yeah, definitely. And
go on.
No, I was trying to think. I lost the train of thought. No, it's fine.
And yeah, I mean, he's definitely the character I can most relate to, which makes him a good character to latch onto, and one whose trajectory we're going to be following with a lot of intense scrutiny, because we kind of know what Frank's going to do. At least we don't know specifically what his plan is at all times, but we kind of know the basic trajectory of what he's trying to do in any given situation. And that's not as clear for Russo, which makes him the character about whom I find there's the most suspense.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think it's still an episode or two away, the one where we really see that struggle within him. But when you see somebody struggling with whether or not to do the right thing, it's somehow worse when they don't do the right thing, as opposed to somebody like Frank who doesn't struggle with it. He's just going to do the thing that gets him what he wants.
Yeah, good point. So, let's move on then. So we started late. Simon. We started a little late, so we're kind of running out of time here. But I also wanted to address the other lead character. Tell you what, I'm just going to open it up to the floor. So, Zoe, start talking.
Oh, I hate her.
Why do you hate her now?
You know, it's weird, because this is another thing that's sort of a difference with the UK version, is I didn't particularly hate the character. There's something, I think it's all encapsulated in that scene, her last scene there, when she's on the phone to Frank, and he's like, close your eyes, what do you see? And the fact that that's what she wants, that it's not about finding a good story, it's not about being a good reporter, it's about being the person on TV, being the person on camera. And I found when I watch TV shows, I have this sort of idealism of what I want out of journalists. Mm-hmm. And I found the same thing when I was watching season 5 of The Wire, which is set inside a newsroom, which is, it's a side that really bothers me. And I know it's like the realism of it, but it offends my idealism in a way that sort of surprises me. And so that character just becomes really repulsive to me.
I thought she was acting a little bit too innocent or naive when she was on camera. That was...
Oh, yeah.
Oh, definitely.
The fact that that's all part of her act it keeps blowing my mind because this is something I talked a lot with Allison about in private. Was that I felt like she was done up to look a lot younger than I think that character should be. Like, I know that she's young and just trying to break into the industry, but there are certain scenes where she looks like Veronica Mars.
You're not wrong.
Cracking a story, which ripples out into everything else about how we perceive that character. She exudes a sort of innocence that she doesn't have.
Oh, definitely.
And it makes scenes like the one last week where she's talking to I can't remember her name, but the White House correspondent at the Herald, where she was like, if you just want to if you need any help with anything, and she's like, oh, so you can hobnob with the bigwigs, and she's like, no, I just want to help. And you're like, no, you don't.
Yeah, I was like, please, yeah.
Please. And then later, of course, that pivotal scene where she says, well, we're operating in a moral gray area, which I'm okay with.
Ugh.
But then this week she's sitting there with Hammerschmidt and with what's her name, the owner of the paper, and saying, do you want my source or do you want my integrity?
But yeah, it's like
that's what matters to her.
Yeah. The scene where she's texting Frank.
That was next.
I find it fascinating because she obviously thinks that she's manipulated him there, and the way that you sort of see him laugh at it and play along at the same time.
Yeah,
I do think there is a sort of lust thing there that ties back to when he was staring at her ass in the first episode.
Yeah.
But I also just think that he is really amused by it.
They are their flirtation is escalating. And it got to the point where when Allison and I were watching this together, I looked at her and said, is this going where I think it's going? Because I don't know if I'm okay with it. And, you know, is this the question that how uncomfortable is it that this relationship is so sexualized? And is it made more uncomfortable by the fact that Zoe is actually made up to look quite a bit younger than I think her character is supposed to be? Is it made worse by the fact of this professional relationship complicated?
I have a hard time. I have to be honest. I have a hard time judging how creepy it is because I have a thing for Kevin Spacey, which makes it makes it really hard to judge it objectively.
Fair enough.
So I see why it's really creepy and like disturbing, but I can't. I don't know.
I don't know. I kind of wish that they would have just kept flirting and she would have just kept pushing him off. But now that they've gone on the other side of that, I'm just hoping that that they don't kill off her character. I don't mean literally kill, but they don't just ruin her drive. I don't know. Am I describing it? I mean, do you understand what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think I see what you mean. Weren't you the one yesterday or last week who was positing that she could be a real thorn in his side later on?
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm just anticipating. I'm anticipating that he's having some fun with her, right? He's having a lot of fun with her on several different levels, on at least 2 different levels, and you know, later on when things get more heady for him, and he's like, okay, Zoe, stop, you know, and she's going to be like, no, we have this established thing going, and that's what I'm anticipating. That he's going to become a problem, and
it seems to me at this point that she could go in either direction. He could, you know, bend her to the point where she really doesn't get to exercise her own motive at all, or she could resist and actually start working against him. And we're not sure which way she's going to break yet.
No, that's why I keep telling you to watch the other version. That's the UK version. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's I don't know. So this is going to be interesting. That's another. I like the fact that there's still a lot of mystery that they're taking the different characters in different directions than compared to the original. Zoe is she's interesting. She knows enough to work to get. She knows enough to hurt herself and other people. I'll say that.
Okay. That's a good point. I don't think I had any other major points that we haven't touched on yet. Was there anything in general that you guys were itching to discuss about the Peachoid episode that we haven't touched on in this discussion yet?
There was one, and it's a small thing, but I think it says a lot about the characters. That scene when Frank first goes to see that guy who has made this into an issue, and Frank says to him something to the effect of, you may hate my guts, but the classy thing to do would have been to invite us to have some of that tea. And I thought that was interesting to show the way that Frank goes about treating his enemies.
Oh yeah. Well,
and
Underwood's a real keep your friends close and enemies closer kind of guy. And I think that's part of the reason why right before the cold open, or right at the end of the cold open, he looks at the camera and says, "I hate this small ball shit," which is they don't know how to play the game. Here's this guy that they should be circling around each other and you know, pretending to make nice, and here's a dude who's sitting there openly drinking on his own from a large pitcher. And not sharing it in any way. And he's just like, come on. That's not how this works.
Yeah, I think he's offended that he has to deal with somebody who's on that level.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Like, that guy shouldn't be a problem for him, but he's just managed to make himself a problem.
Yeah. And he's especially bitter about that because guess where he would never have to go again if he were Secretary of State?
Yeah.
The one place in the world that would never need him. Yeah, I did have some thoughts, some sort of half-baked ideas about what this show has to say about Underwood at home. You know, what is his home? Is he more at home here? Oh, obviously, he's more at home in D.C. But I don't know if I had any real conclusions other than to say it's interesting how fish out of water he feels when this is actually his home district.
Right. I must have missed something. Did he when he went back home? Where was he staying?
At his other house.
At his okay. I wasn't quite sure that was his other house because it felt like he was staying with a friend.
Exactly.
And that's kind of, I was like, well, whose house is he in at this moment? I'm not. So that kind of threw me off. So
yeah, but it's definitely theirs because they have the phone conversation about when she planted the flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and also I think in current political climate, I think there's like 10 Congress people in the entire House of Representatives that don't have two houses. It's really, you know.
I did like seeing him making the sandwiches, though. There was something about that I found very appealing because it was such a. This is very like small town Southern politics.
Yeah.
Like I'm making you. It's sandwiches and potatoes.
Yeah, and that felt like the kind of thing he wouldn't do for any amount of money in D.C. It seemed so out of character, but he also looked kind of comfortable doing it because it's like, this is how the game is played. This is what we're doing here. So exactly. I mean, he knows what he needs to do. He doesn't like it. He'd much rather be playing chess with the big boys up in D.C.
Yeah.
That was much would rather than doing everything, but I think he liked getting his hands dirty a little bit.
That's true too. He seems to be at his best when there's need his way through. Lynn, is there something brushing up against your microphone or something?
Yep. I Good
We're
job.
getting some pretty loud static over here.
That was me.
Okay. Was there anything else you guys wanted to talk about?
I don't think so. I think we've covered most of it.
Really
Let's try
good.
not to talk about stuff. 'Cause
Yeah.
I keep forgetting what episode things are in. It starts to get really meaty after this, so.
Yeah, it does start to get really meaty, and that was another thing that I liked about the structure, was that this is kind of the eye of the storm. It's actually kind of a funny episode. It's it's kind of a breather, and we're gonna get to some really intense stuff, and maybe break out the tissues a little bit in the next couple episodes. So we'll be talking about episode 4, chapter 4, in this same hangout, same time next week. So on behalf of Geeks of the Round, we've got Emily, Lynn Ith, and myself, Jon Eric, saying good night.
Hey.
Adios.